In 1920, a man with no company, no technology, and no product raised $40 million in less than a year. In today's money, that becomes hundreds of millions, all built on promises. He didn't invent anything or discover a hidden formula. He didn't create value. He simply promised returns so attractive that questioning them felt unnecessary. Thousands of ordinary people handed over their life savings, willingly, not because they were foolish, but because they wanted to believe there was a way out. You've seen this story before. You just didn't know it started in 1920. America in the early 1920s was a country drunk on optimism. The war was over. Factories were running, and money suddenly felt easier, faster, and closer than ever before. For the first time, ordinary people believed wealth was no longer reserved for bankers and industrialists. It felt democratic, accessible, almost inevitable. This was a financial world with very few rules and even fewer adults in the room. Regulation was light, oversight was polite, and trust quietly filled the gaps where verification should have been. Into this environment walked Charles Ponzi, an Italian immigrant with a long history of failure, and one deeply learned skill. He understood that people didn't want explanations. They wanted relief. They wanted certainty. And above all, they wanted to stop feeling anxious about money. Ponzi didn't sell investments. He sold confidence, time, and the comforting idea that money could finally work quietly in the background, without questions, without stress. His story sounded technical enough to feel legitimate, yet vague enough to avoid scrutiny. Wrapped in phrases like international reply coupons, foreign arbitrage, and postal inefficiencies. Most people didn't understand how it worked. And that was exactly the point. Because when returns arrive quickly, explanations become optional. Early investors got paid. Then they told friends. Friends told family. And confidence compounded faster than interest ever could. Banks remained cautious. Newspapers stayed curious. But the public was convinced. And once belief takes hold, skepticism becomes socially uncomfortable. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Nothing about this required genius. Only timing, trust, and a crowd desperate to believe that this time was different. Because when a system is built on hope instead of verification, collapse is not a possibility. It's simply a matter of time. Once the money started moving, everything accelerated. Lines formed outside Ponzi's office every morning. Cash flowed in faster than it could be counted. And the promise of easy returns began to feel normal. Early investors were paid on time, sometimes ahead of schedule. And that single fact did more marketing than any advertisement ever could. When someone you know gets paid, skepticism feels rude. When everyone you know gets paid, doubt starts to feel stupid. This was how the scheme scaled. Not through complexity, but through repetition. Money came in, money went out, and no one asked what happened in between. Ponzi didn't discourage questions. He drowned them. He spoke confidently, dressed sharply, and surrounded himself with the appearance of success. People weren't buying numbers. They were buying reassurance. The reassurance that someone else had figured it out, so they didn't have to. The returns sounded incredible, but not unbelievable. And that distinction mattered. 50% in 45 days wasn't framed as magic. It was framed as opportunity. Newspapers amplified the story. Neighbors repeated it. And soon the question wasn't whether it was real, but whether you were smart enough to get in early. Money has a strange effect on time. When returns arrive quickly, the future feels solved, and the present feels justified. People quit jobs, postponed doubts, and reinvested profits without hesitation. Because pulling money out felt like stepping off a moving train. And the faster the train moved, the harder it became to imagine it ever stopping. This was the peak, not because the numbers were highest, but because belief was. At this stage, the scheme no longer needed persuasion. It sustained itself. But every system built on confidence alone carries a hidden flaw. It requires silence, constant inflows, and the absence of curiosity. And none of those conditions last forever. Every financial illusion begins to crack the same way. Quietly, at the edges, long before the crowd notices. At first, the questions were small, technical, and easy to ignore. How exactly were these returns generated? And why did no one else seem able to replicate them? A few journalists began doing the math. Accountants ran the numbers. And for the first time, the story stopped sounding impressive and started sounding impossible. To sustain the returns he promised, the volume of international reply coupons required would have exceeded the global supply. Not stretched it, exceeded it. That was the moment the illusion met arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't negotiate. Redemption requests began to increase. Slowly at first, then faster. As whispers replaced certainty, confidence doesn't collapse all at once. It leaks. Each withdrawal required cash, and each payment depended on someone else depositing money that same day. Timing became fragile. The system could survive greed. It could survive ignorance. What it couldn't survive was hesitation. Inside the operation, stress replaced confidence. Payments slowed. Explanations grew longer, and delays were blamed on paperwork, banks, or timing issues. These were the classic warning signs. But warning signs only work if people want to be warned. Many investors ignored the red flags because walking away would have meant admitting they were wrong. And psychologically, that cost felt higher than the financial risk. Meanwhile, regulators finally took notice. Not because the story sounded unbelievable, but because the money trail no longer made sense. Once trust begins to erode, speed becomes the enemy. What once felt like momentum now feels like pressure. The same mechanism that made the scheme grow now worked in reverse. Word spread. Doubts multiplied. And the line outside the office started shrinking. And in systems like this, shrinking lines are not a warning. They are a countdown. The collapse didn't arrive with a single headline. It arrived as a rush. A sudden surge of people asking for their money back. All at once. For months, the system had depended on perfect timing. Now timing turned against it. Deposits slowed. Withdrawals accelerated. And the math finally caught up. When too many people try to exit at the same time, illusions don't bend. They break. Outside the office, the line changed tone. The excitement was gone, replaced by urgency, then anger. People weren't asking about returns anymore. They were asking for their principal. Inside, explanations multiplied, but cash did not. Checks were delayed, payments stalled, and every delay created more panic. Authorities moved quickly once the arithmetic became undeniable. Accounts were frozen, books were examined. The story unraveled in days. What they found was exactly what the skeptics had warned about. There was no engine, no underlying business, just money from new investors paying old ones. The scale shocked the public. Tens of thousands of victims, millions lost, life savings wiped out. Newspapers that once praised the operation now documented the damage. Photos of ruined families replaced stories of easy wealth. The man at the center of it all was arrested, charged, and sentenced. The scheme was over. The money was gone. But here's the uncomfortable part. The collapse felt sudden only to the people inside it. From the outside, it had been inevitable, because systems built on constant inflows don't fail when confidence disappears. They fail when confidence hesitates. And once hesitation spreads faster than deposits, there is no recovery. Only reckoning. The damage didn't end when the scheme collapsed. That was only the moment it became visible. Families lost homes. Savings disappeared. And trust in financial institutions fractured overnight. For many victims, recovery wasn't measured in months, but in generations. The legal consequences were clear. Arrests were made. Sentences were handed down, and the system was formally declared a fraud. But the psychological consequences were harder to resolve. People didn't just lose money. They lost faith in their own judgment. Many asked the same question, quietly and painfully. How did I not see this coming? The uncomfortable answer is that the warning signs were always there. They were simply inconvenient. This wasn't a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of incentives. Admitting doubt meant risking social embarrassment, lost opportunity, and the fear of missing out. That is why this story didn't stay in the past. It became a template, a repeatable structure, a financial pattern that could be copied, scaled, and modernized. The names changed. The assets changed. The language evolved, but the mechanism stayed exactly the same. Money from new participants pays old participants. Confidence replaces verification. Growth becomes proof. Every generation believes it's smarter than the last. And every generation discovers, painfully, that desire clouds judgment faster than ignorance ever could. This is the real legacy of the collapse. Not the money lost, but the lesson ignored. Because financial history doesn't repeat itself exactly. It rhymes, waits, and returns when conditions feel familiar enough. When you strip away the headlines, the outrage, and the courtroom drama, this story leaves behind a simple truth. The most dangerous lies don't look dangerous at all. They look calm. They sound reasonable. And they arrive wrapped in exactly what people want to hear. The original Ponzi scheme didn't succeed because people were greedy monsters. It succeeded because uncertainty is exhausting. And certainty is seductive. Every generation tells itself the same comforting story. That this time is different. That technology has fixed the risks. That smarter people are in charge now. But the mechanics never change. Money still moves faster than verification. Confidence still outruns caution. And growth still disguises fragility. That is why understanding this story matters. Not as history, but as self-defense. Because the next version won't announce itself as a scam. It will call itself innovation, opportunity, the future, and when it does, the only real protection you have is memory, skepticism, and the courage to ask uncomfortable questions before the crowd stops listening. If this story helped you see the pattern behind the promises, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need it. Because understanding financial history isn't about predicting the future. It's about recognizing it when it shows up again.